Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marcia Constant, president of Tidewater Community College, and it is my pleasure this afternoon to welcome all of you, and introduce a guest speaker this afternoon, Mr. Damien Jeter. We're so excited to have him here, but I wanted to extend a warm welcome to all of you for this wonderful event celebrating Black history. I will tell you that I am a proponent of the arts, and I have enjoyed listening to some of Damien's fabulous works. He is an outstanding article, and you will hear more about him. So this will be a tremendous treat for all of our students, our faculty, and staff. I also want to say that I enjoyed seeing Damien as he participated in Sanctuary Road here in Norfolk on January 28th. So without further ado, it is my privilege to welcome Dean Carolyn Phillips, who would further continue the program. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us as we celebrate Black History Month. I am Carolyn Phillips, Pathway Dean of Arts and Humanities, and I am honored to provide a statement of occasion for this wonderful event. Black History Month is a time where we intentionally honor and celebrate the diverse contributions that people of African descent have made and continue to make in our community, nation, and world. In 1926, the contributions of African and Black Americans were rarely honored. Carter G. Woodson, a highly accomplished man whose parents endured the atrocities of slavery, helped to establish a week-long observance to honor the achievements of the millions of people who helped build this land. In 1976, President Gerald Ford urged Americans to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history. That Black History Month became an official month-long observance, which is now celebrated in countries all over the world. Thank you, and I'd like to introduce my colleague, Mark Dennison, for the introduction.
Thank you, Dean Phillips. Damien Jeter is an acclaimed composer who infuses classical music with various styles from the Black diaspora to create music that furthers the cause for social justice. His rapidly growing body of work includes chamber, vocal, orchestral, and full operatic works, with his compositions being praised for their skillful vocal writing. He is composer in residence at the Richmond Symphony through the 2024-25 season and serves as the interim music director and artistic advisor at the Portland Opera, as well as the artistic advisor for the Renaissance Ensemble. In the 2023-24 season, Des Moines Metro Opera presented the full-length world premiere of Jeter's opera American Apollo, while the Virginia Opera holds a workshop of Loving versus Virginia, a new major work co-commissioned by Virginia Opera and the Richmond Symphony, which will premiere as part of Virginia Opera's 50th anniversary season in May of 2025. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra programmed Jeter's Annunciation, and Richmond Symphony premieres a brand new work, Sinfonia Americana, to be conducted by music director Valentina Pileggi. His song cycle Cotton, commissioned by the Lyric Fest, will see its New York premiere at the 92nd Street Y, starring Denise Graves and Justin Austin. Additionally, the Recording Inclusivity Initiative recorded String Quartet No. 1 Neo Soul. Future commissions include premieres at Seattle Opera and Emmanuel Music and world premiere operatic productions in 2024, 25, and 26 at Des Moines Metro, Virginia, in-series, and Portland Operas. Jeter will also have subsequent premieres at Richmond Symphony. Last season, Cotton was given its world premiere in Philadelphia, followed by its Washington, D.C. premiere at the Kennedy Center, presented by the Washington Performing Arts, and his motet was performed by Emmanuel Music. Jeter also conducted his own piece, An African American Requiem, at the Fort Worth Opera, plus led the performance of Absence, Terence Blanchard, with the Portland Opera. In 2022, Jeter had 6 premieres as a composer, An African American Requiem in partnership with the Renaissance Ensemble and the Oregon Symphony, I Said What I Said with Imani Winds, co-commissioned by Anima Mundi Productions, Chamber Music Northwest, and the Oregon Bach Festival, Holy Ground for Glimmerglass Opera, Elegy for the American Guild of Organists, the Bronze Legacy for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and the chamber version of American Apollo for the Des Moines Metro Opera. Favorite recent highlights include the commission's Cantata for a Hopeful Tomorrow for the Washington Chorus, with subsequent performances at the Pacific Chorale, Choral Arts Northwest, Bethune-Cookman University, Northern Arizona University, Southwestern University, and the Berkshire Choral International, with future performances at Minnesota Choral Artists. The Justice Symphony for the University of Michigan, with subsequent performances with the Washington Chorus at the Kennedy Center, and future performances at the Fort Worth Opera. Baroque for the Portland Baroque Orchestra, which will have subsequent performances with the Seattle Symphony, Invisible for the Opera Theater Oregon, and String Quartet No. 1 Neo Soul for the All Classical Portland and On-Site Opera. His piece 1619 also appeared with the On-Site Opera as part of their presentation, What Lies Beneath. Jeter is an alumnus of the Austrian American Mozart Festival and the Aspen Opera Center, and was an Irma Cooper Vocal Competition finalist. He toured with the American Spiritual Ensemble and is the owner of DG Music Sansphere Publishing. Music in Context, an examination of Western European music through a socio-political lens, the book he co-authored, is available on Amazon or from the publisher Kendall Hunt. You can find Damien at www.damienjetermusic.com. And now, without further ado, Mr. Damien Jeter.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank Professor Dennison for the introduction. And I'd also like to send a special thank you to Alicia Peebles for inviting me to speak with you all today. And I hope you don't mind if this chat is a little bit heterodox. I've prepared a speech, but it's not going to be chock full of formalities you might expect from a person giving a speech on a topic they're supposedly an expert in. But anyway, speaking of expert, let me make it very plain that from the beginning, I do not claim to be an expert of anything, but I think my lived experience has provided me with enough information to speak with confidence about a small number of topics. And one of these is the realm of classical music. I'm putting those in quotes. And to augment the vast subject even further, Black folks in classical music. Now, I'm using these quotations because when I speak about classical music, for two reasons, two things come to mind. I'm not talking about the classical era, which is capital C, classical era is what I like to call it, that birthed some of the most famous composers that we know from the mid 18th century and the early 19th centuries, like Mozart and Beethoven, for example. Those guys, people you may have heard of. And the second reason is because classical music comes with its own set of stereotypes that deem the art inaccessible to those who don't fit a certain financial demographic. There's a mystery around classical music, I think. But just as I want you and honestly me to feel comfortable receiving and giving this speech, I want all folks to feel that sense of ease when they enter the concert hall. Of course, being a Black musician working in this realm that I chose to work in has its own set of challenges, which is a whole other speech unto itself, but it affords the opportunity to break down some of the barriers that keep the concert hall, like it was in Mozart's day, fairly heterogeneous. But we are out here. And by we, I mean Black folks. And by the way, happy Black History Month. And the reality is we've been out here. The term Black excellence has blossomed through present day colloquialisms, but its essence is firmly rooted in our ancestors' histories through their stories, harrowing strength, bravery, resilience, and their ability to envision a better tomorrow, even if not in their lifetime, but for generations after them. And I have to admit that I have a little bit of an issue with the term Black excellence because it somehow suggests that our worthiness is determined only by how excellent we are. And then when you add to that, it's according to which standard. And is it possible for me to have a bad day and still be excellent? But anyway, I came up with the title of the speech, so I guess I should stick with it. And I did a little digging. So in his article published on LinkedIn, English data analyst Ovo Guerrero defines it as a term used to describe outstanding achievements and contributions made by individuals of African descent across various fields, including but not limited to academics, arts, sciences, sports, business, and activism. It encompasses excellence in professional accomplishments, leadership, creativity, innovation, and resilience, often in the face of systemic barriers and historical oppression. Maybe that's where the standard comes in. Black excellence celebrates the achievements of Black individuals and communities and highlights their inevitable contributions to society, culture, and advancement of humanity as a whole. I mean, that's a definition I can get behind, but I still have my feelings about the term, which I will come back to in a second. But first, I wanted to give you a little bit of information on how I got started in the industry and how I ended up where I am today, which I still don't quite know, but here I am. I grew up in a musical household. I'm actually from Virginia. I live in Chicago now, but I'm a native of Virginia. I grew up in Chesterfield County, which is just south of Richmond. And I grew up in southern Chesterfield, so I'm very familiar with farms, tobacco fields, pig farms, things like this. So this is kind of where I grew up. I grew up in a musical household. My mother was an astounding singer. She sang mostly in church, but she sang other stuff too. My grandmother lived with us. She played the piano and the organ, sometimes for church. My dad had and still has a very eclectic musical tastes, owning records across multiple genres, which I'm trying to get from him now, since records are making a comeback. Some of the records he owned were folks like Earth, Wind and Fire, Harlan and Oates, Beethoven and Tchaikovsky. Yes, Beethoven and Tchaikovsky. Back in the 80s, Time Life magazine had a special series where you could purchase classical music records. And my parents bought two records. They bought Beethoven 6 and they bought Tchaikovsky. It was either 5 or 6. I'm not exactly sure which one. But when I get the records, I'll be able to tell the story a little bit better. I think it was 6 though. But anyway, I can still see the covers today. Beethoven's album, they both had the similar style, but Beethoven's album had a bust of Beethoven, which was sitting on a blue velvet, sort of crushed velvet material. Tchaikovsky's was the same. There was a bust of Tchaikovsky, which was sitting on top of a sort of burnt orange crushed velvet material. I can still see those records to this day. But I never knew how much those records would change my life, and I don't think my parents did either. I'm often asked about what made me gravitate towards classical music and not another type of music. And the fact of the matter is that I love all types of music. I'm my father's child. If it's good, I will listen to it. But I chose to have a career in classical music for some strange reason. The truth is I really don't know, and probably had something to do with my love of classical music probably had something to do with the acoustic element of the symphony orchestra. The power of human connection when playing in an orchestra, the power of the human experience and the music itself, the synergy, these are feelings that I couldn't describe when I was a child, but now that I'm a little bit older, I can attach words to what I remember feeling back then. I would watch PBS's great performances, and that's how I got my classical music fix, aside from the records and CDs, which I purchased later as a teenager. There were orchestras nearby. There was the Petersburg Symphony. There's the Richmond Symphony, which I'm so privileged to be the composer in residence for them now. There's also the Virginia Symphony, which is in your neighborhood in the Tidewater region. But oddly enough, with the exception of the Petersburg Symphony, I didn't really see a lot of Black folks in these groups. And that didn't really cross my mind as a child. But through PBS, I had front row seats to the New York Phil, Chicago Symphony, Berlin Philharmonic. These are some of the major orchestras of the world available right to me in my own living room. I took piano lessons. I took organ lessons as a child. And that's where I began my life as a composer. With the encouragement of my teacher, I constructed little melodies on the piano. And then the challenge was to try to remember those melodies because I didn't really have the skills to write them down at that point. And because improvisation is such an important part of playing the organ, I began to make up music on the spot. From an early age, it was instilled in me that not only could I play music that someone else wrote, I could play music that I wrote, and other people could play music that I wrote. So through every phase of my musical journey, composition was a part of it in some way. The middle school, high school, college, and certainly now. So the question I oftentimes get asked is, why opera? How did this come to be? And the answer is, well, I'll tell you what the answer is. I knew nothing about opera. I could tell you about any symphonic composer. I even memorized symphonies by several composers, which I still have locked in my memory. One thing I used to do as a teenager is go to the library, go to our public library, and if they didn't have a lot of scores, but the ones they had, I would check them out, and I would check out the CD, and I would follow the scores right along. So I didn't know how much of an education I was giving to myself during this time, learning, talking about, orchestration, how to read a score and things like this. And coincidentally, I forgot to mention that my grandmother was probably who I consider my very first music teacher. She was not a professional musician, but you don't really have to be to get the amount of education that she gave me. She lived with us, and I remember she would just sit back in her room and just kind of sing her feelings. And so from that, I learned how to emote and several other things, which again, that's a whole, I could talk about that for a long, long time. But anyway, let me focus here. So I used to check out the scores and the CDs from the library and follow along. And also during that time, I was very fascinated with kind of early-ish jazz, like Billie Holiday, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Lester Young. Those folks, I have a sort of a wide range of knowledge about that era as well. But again, I didn't know anything about opera. So I don't even remember the first time I heard an operatic voice, but I think it must have been on PBS. And it probably was the late, great Jessie Norman. I say probably because I've seen this video of her draped in a French flag singing La Marseillaise. And when I saw it not too long ago, it felt so familiar to me that I must have seen it when I was a child. So anyway, I went to Old Dominion University. I was a trumpet major, education, with an education focus. And on my very first day of school, I took a beginning voice class. And part of the training as a music education major was that you are supposed to take classes for each instrument. We call them methods classes. And so one of the first things, the very first class that I took, that I went to as a freshman was beginning voice class. My first methods classes was beginning voice. Sorry, I'm straying away from the speech a little bit, and so I'm trying to come back and focus. Now, as a child, I sang all the time, but when my voice changed, I didn't sing as much because I didn't know what was going on in here. I mean, I was singing stuff on par with Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey. I was singing all those whistle tones and things like this. And then when my voice changed, I was like, I don't know how to do that anymore. So I stopped singing for a long, long time. So that first day of college, the teacher made us get up in front of the class and sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. It was sort of very interesting that she assumed that everybody knew that song. But anyway, so I stood up in front of the class. Great. I got up, sang the song. People clapped, as they did for everyone, and I sat down. Upon leaving, my teacher, Dr. Joanne Sims, encouraged me to take private lessons because she heard something that was potentially operatic in my voice, something to do with the resonance, which I now understand. So opera singers don't use microphones. We rely on our facial structures and our sinuses and the resonating chambers in our face actually to project the sound. And some folks naturally have a very resonant voice. I probably get it from my dad. I didn't know I had this, but she heard something in there that led me to take voice lessons, and she encouraged me to do that. And so I did. I don't know if I did the first semester, but I did the semesters after that. Still studying trumpet. I had my first singing gig at a church at First Lutheran in Norfolk, and I got that because I sang a jury. And my sight singing teacher, Dr. Tepley, said, "Hey, I have a job for you if you want it." So from that point on, I was a professional singer. I wasn't composing much at that time, but when the spirit moved me, I found time to write. And I wish that in the real world it were that way, but now I have bills. So I have to write even when the spirit does not move me. So as of late, my focus has been composition. The night changed for me when in 2016, I decided to use my artistry to the fullest extent to support causes that were personal to me and to my community. I was inspired by a quote from the pianist, singer, and civil rights activist Nina Simone, who you see a picture of behind me, who said, "It's the artist's duty to reflect the times." My compositions often explore themes of identity, social justice, and personal experience, reflecting my own background and perspective as a Black artist. And some of the titles that Professor Dennison also mentioned include An African American Requiem, which is a full requiem mass in Latin and English that is dedicated to the lives, to the victims of racial violence in this country. 1619, which is a song cycle for choir, and it is a setting of the WPA back in the 20s, I believe, maybe earlier than that, would go around and collect stories from formerly enslaved individuals. Some of them talked about how they got over here to the country. Some of them talked about their relatives who came from Africa, and they just basically talked about their experience on the plantations. Cotton was a song cycle that was alluded to. American Apollo, which focuses on the model Thomas McKellar, who was the primary model of the painter John Singer Sargent. And Thomas McKellar was a Black man, which will have its full premiere this summer. The Bronze Legacy, which is a setting of the poem, and Invisible, which is a setting of the preamble to the book Invisible by Ralph Ellison. I'm trying to get the rights to that so I can write the full opera, but I'm having a hard time. But anyway, I've had the opportunity to be commissioned by a variety of organizations like Virginia Opera, as was mentioned, which will premiere my opera Loving v. Virginia in May of 2025, so almost a year from now. And I've had my works performed in some of the most prestigious houses in this country and formed relationships with colleagues near and far. Most notably, the Blacknificent Seven. We call ourselves B7, not to be confused with Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. A glorified group of basically we're a glorified text group. People try to make us bigger than that, but that's what we are. And they include members Jessie Montgomery, who I'm so proud of her. She recently won a Grammy for Best Contemporary Classical Composition. Carlos Simon, Joel Thompson, Sean Okpebolo, Jasmine Barnes, and Dave Ragland. We started making some strides as a collective, and we actually had a debut as a group last December with the Chicago Symphony when they played a piece by each of us. But continuing with the idea of Black excellence, this is a topic that has been overlooked in the grand narrative of classical music. But in recent years, most notably after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, The lack of prominence of Black artists in this realm was the topic of discussion for many presenters after they were basically forced to see, the tragedies that happened. I'm pretty sure that not only in music, but different sectors across the wide range of industries were having the same conversations, that, actually, racism still exists, right? And so I, for one, participated in a number of panels and talkbacks on the subject. And I was asked to write music at a rate that did not have me wanting for anything during the pandemic, I have to admit. Black artists from all disciplines were responding to these tragedies in ways that historians will probably look back and comment on the cultural renaissance that we are currently living in, particularly a Black renaissance, I think. For far too long, the contributions of Black composers, musicians, and artists to the world of classical music have been sidelined, and their achievements have been buried beneath layers of systemic racism and prejudice. But let's shine a spotlight on some of these individuals and their invaluable contributions to the rich tapestry of this art form. So as I said, I'll get to that in a second. Classical music, whether rightly or wrongly, is placed in the upper echelons of artistic expressions. Yet, historical narrative surrounding classical music has been one of exclusion, with Black composers and musicians often regulated to the margins of this craft. But despite facing immense adversity, Black excellence has shown through illuminating the world with its brilliance and resilience. So, as I said, we've been here. So let's journey back through history to a time when slavery cast a dark shadow over the United States and when much of the Western world. In the midst of unimaginable oppression, persons who were enslaved found solace and strength in music. Our spirituals and folk songs became a testament to the enduring human spirit, laying the foundation for what would later evolve into blues, jazz, gospel, which is tied to popular music today. The Czech composer Antonín Dvořák, while teaching at the National Conservatory of Music in America, which was located in New York, befriended African-American singer and composer whose name was Harry T. Burleigh. Burleigh introduced the spiritual to Dvořák. Dvořák later claimed that it was the Negro melodies that was America's music, and the composers should rely on them when composing in an American style. However, no one took him seriously. So Dvořák, as I said, was a Czech composer, and he used a lot of folk melodies from his own country and infused them into his compositions. And so his thought was that composers should use the spirituals, he called them Negro melodies, that was the term back then, spirituals, work songs, things like this, and infuse that idiom into their compositions. In fact, he wrote a symphony called Symphony of the New World, which was inspired a lot by Black music and also Native American music. So let's go back to the time of Mozart. One of the most remarkable stories of Black excellence in classical music is that of Joseph Bologna. He was born in the French colony of Guadeloupe in the 18th century. He rose to prominence as a virtuoso violinist, composer, and conductor in Parisian high society. Despite facing rampant racism and prejudice, Bologna defied the odds, captivating audiences with his unparalleled talent and charisma. But when Marie Antoinette wanted to appoint him music director of the Paris Opera, he was ousted by a group of women who refused to perform under his baton, despite him being more than qualified for the job. And not only was Joseph a fine musician, he was a prize-winning fencer. He was the leader of an all-Black regiment in France, where he acquired his title Chevalier de Saint-Georges. And some of you may have seen the movie that came out about his life last year called Chevalier. But his music went into obscurity after his death, while his contemporaries Mozart and Haydn flourished. Supposedly, Napoleon went through great lengths to have Joseph's name erased from history. But in the late 1990s, his name began to reappear again. And there seemed to be an even bigger resurgence in the 2010s when many of his works were programmed. I've been actually approached to write an opera about his life. I don't know when I'm supposed to do it, but it has been posed. So anyway, fast forward a couple hundred years. I'm skipping over a lot of folks because I only have a limited amount of time, but fast forward a couple hundred years and we have the resurgence of another sort of not so long lost composer, Florence Price. Price was born in Arkansas, but spent most of her active composing life in Chicago. She was the first African-American woman to have her music performed by a major symphony orchestra. In this case, it was her first symphony. I believe she's written 3 of them. In 2009, a discovery of her manuscripts in the attic of her old summer home led to the performance of many of Price's works, long after she died in 1953. It's a real pity that she was not alive to see the importance of her contributions, not only to the art form as a whole, but to the canon of important Black artists who are helping to augment the traditional canon. Price is a great example of using those Negro melodies that Dvorak was talking about in her own compositions. Now, of course, she was Black, so that was a natural extension of who she was, and it happened to be that way. And speaking from experience, we are the product of all the music that has come across our ears. In fact, one of the joys that I have as a composer is to make sure that I include elements of my Blackness in my compositions. Well, it's never intentional, but it happens that way. Whether it's through direct use of spirituals or driving rhythms, grooves, or melodies that come out of the blues or jazz traditions, what I can offer orchestras, opera companies, chamber music series, etc., are sounds that you wouldn't expect from a symphony orchestra. And after hundreds and hundreds of years and several musical eras, the very daunting task of putting little black dots in an order that has never been done before is conquered by the infusion of some of these traits in the classical music realm today. Throughout the centuries, Black composers and musicians have continued to defy expectations and break down barriers in the world of classical music, from the pioneering works of William Grant Still, often referred to as the Dean of African American Composers, to the groundbreaking performances of Marian Anderson, who shattered racial barriers as one of the first African American opera singers to perform at the Metropolitan Opera. Black excellence has left an indelible mark on classical music history, and we feel the effects of that today more than ever. Although I'm part of a 7 Black composer collective, we certainly are not the only ones who exist in the field. And the number of Black musicians actively performing today is still low, but it is much better than what it was. My fear is that with schools cutting arts programs, access to music will become even more difficult, and the playing field will be left much smaller than it was when there was enough money to maintain these arts programs. The journey towards inclusivity and representation in classical music is far from over. Sorry, I've got some sirens going on. Despite the strides we have made, systemic racism and discrimination continue to persist in our society and within the classical music industry itself. Too often, Black musicians are overlooked for opportunities. Our voices are silenced by the entrenched culture of privilege and elitism. And while there has been so much progress, I feel like things are taking a step back. All the DEI initiatives by performing arts organizations that came out of 2020 have been overridden by the fact that after the pandemic, which I guess we're still in, question mark, audiences have continued to dwindle in most markets, and even in some of the biggest markets. So the focus has become less about diversifying the field, but more about getting the butts in the seats. And for many organizations, that means going back to Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, although there are a few outliers. Richmond Symphony is one of them, for example. Virginia Opera is one of them, for example. It's not only a mere hunch that diverse programming brings about diverse audiences. It's a fact. I have seen this for myself over the years. More recently, as was mentioned earlier, I was in a production with Virginia Opera called Sanctuary Road. It's the story of African-American conductor of the Underground Railroad who documented the lives of the formerly enslaved who came through Philadelphia. The audience for all 6 shows, which we just closed on Sunday in Richmond, was a beautiful mix of people from many different backgrounds and ages. It proves that when people see themselves represented on the stage, they're more likely to show up. So this was true at a recent Lyric Opera of Chicago performance that I went to of a piece called Champion by Terrence Blanchard. If you've seen Malcolm X, if you've seen Harriet, any Spike Lee film, I think that Terrence Blanchard has scored all of Spike Lee's films. I don't know if that's completely true, but he's a big film composer. Champion is the story of Emil Griffith, the bisexual black boxer who killed one of his opponents in the ring. The same was true for Terrence's opera Fire Shut in My Bones. The premiere of that at the Met performed, that was the first opera that the Metropolitan Opera performed by a Black composer. And I remember going to that premiere and it was electric. The audience was on fire. The same was true of a piece called An American Dream, which I believe Virginia Opera did. It's an opera about Japanese internment camps. I mean, the examples go on. We'll see what happens with the operas that I've written that'll premiere in the next couple of years. So as we celebrate Black excellence in classical music, let us also reflect on the work that still lies ahead. It is incumbent upon all of us to dismantle the barriers that continue to exclude Black musicians from the classical music world, to amplify our voices, and to ensure that our contributions are recognized and celebrated. As I said, things have gotten better, but with progression, there can also be regression. In closing, let us remember that the essence of classical music lies not only in the color of one's skin, but in the universal language of melody and harmony that transcends all boundaries. Let us strive to build a future where Black excellence in classical music is not only acknowledged, but embraced and celebrated as an integral and wonderful addition to the art form that I fell in love with as a child. Let it become a normal part of the tapestry, as familiar as Beethoven and as accessible as any concert in the popular realm. I would like to close with a song, and the song that I've chosen to sing for you today is a piece by the composer Margaret Bonds, who also, Black composer, also is sort of having a resurgence, along with her contemporary Florence Price, who I mentioned earlier. The piece is called When the Dove Enters In. The text is by Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was a frequent collaborator of Margaret Bonds and also her friend. The style of the piece is in a sort of a gospel type style. And the text is this: have you ever seen a mother seek her erring son and find him deep in sin, doing what he should not have done? Then she falls down on her knees and prays he'll be made whole, and the dove enters into his soul. Oh, when the dove enters in and the light is revealed, your sins are forgiven and your sorrows are healed. On the pathway to glory, new wonders begin, with prayer as the healer when the dove enters in. Have you ever seen a father seek his wandering girl and find her deep in sin, a prisoner of this world? Then he falls down on his knees and prays she'll be made whole, and the dove enters into her soul. Oh, when the dove enters in and the light is revealed, your sins are forgiven and your sorrows are healed. On the pathway to glory, new wonders begin, with prayer as the healer when the dove enters in. Do you have a sinful brother lost outside the fold, wasting all his talents in a world so bleak and cold? Then just fall down on your knees and pray he'll be made whole. Ask the dove to come into his soul. Oh, when the dove enters in and the light is revealed, your sins are forgiven and your sorrows are healed. On the pathway to glory, new wonders begin, with prayer as the healer when the dove enters in. Have you ever seen a mother seek her erring son and find him deep in sin, doing what he should not have done? Then she falls down on her knees and prays he'll be made whole. And the dove enters into his soul. Oh, when the dove enters in and the light is revealed, your sins are forgiven and your sorrows are healed. On the pathway to glory, new wonders begin with prayer as the healer when the dove enters in. Have you ever seen a father seek his wandering girl and find her deep in sin, a prisoner of this world? Then he falls down on his knees and prays she'll be made whole. And the dove enters into his soul. Oh, when the dove enters in and the light is revealed, your sins are forgiven and your sorrows are healed. On the pathway to glory, new wonders begin with prayer as the healer when the dove enters in. Do you have a sinful brother lost outside the fold, wasting all his talents in a world so bleak and cold? Then just fall down on your knees and pray he'll be made whole. Ask the dove to come into his soul. Oh, when the dove enters in and the light is revealed, your sins are forgiven and your sorrows are healed. On the pathway to glory, new wonders begin with prayer as the healer when the dove enters in. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. That was phenomenally awesome. So I've got some questions. Actually, I just finished my advanced music theory class before getting onto our Zoom meeting today. So I've got some questions from some of the students, and I'm not sure if we've gotten any from our live stream chat yet. But let's. You mentioned earlier about growing up in the household with eclectic musical taste, and I think a lot of us can identify with that. I mean, I grew up with everything from switched on Bach in the 70s to Percy Sledge to Johnny Cash, that sort of thing. How do you make the transition for yourself blending these different various musical elements as a composer and a songwriter into your compositions? Are do they grow organically, or are you selective, or how does that work with all your different influences, your musical influences? How do you approach your songwriting and your compositions with those diverse elements?
Well, the thing I will say is that it's never intentional unless it is. So, for example, in the Loving opera, so this takes place in the 50s and the 60s, right? So I knew that I wanted to kind of live in that world for a little bit. And so I was very intentional in including country music. There's some bluegrass in it, there's some rock in it. So there's a protest scene where I knew I wanted to use rock music. And so having been exposed to rock music, it was not a difficult thing for me to do. I would say in other instances, it's a lot of times it's not intentional. And it's always fun for me to hear what other people get out of it, because the piece I just wrote for the Richmond Symphony, it's called Symphony Americana. One of my goals is to, or one of my quests, I should say, as a composer, is to define what that American sound is. I mean, we have Copland and Bernstein and, all these American composers who have sort of made their mark on it. But with the exception of Bernstein, that doesn't include different cultures from this country, right? Which this country is made up of so many different cultures. How can you, say that this is the American sound without including a whole groups of people? And so when I'm writing, it's my blackness is never an intentional thing. It just sort of comes out by nature of me being that. And I think the same goes for any type of musical influence. I'm very lucky in that I can draw from a variety of things, of different genres. But like I said, it's never intentional unless it is. Like for that example, when I said I want to write a rock moment here. And other times when I'm just sort of sitting at the piano and improvising and trying to figure out if I'm stuck in a rut, some of these influences kind of organically come out of me. And that's the same for any composer, I think, would tell you the same thing.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. We oftentimes talk about, we meaning my students and I, and some of my friends, we talk about the compositional process, um, and the songwriting as an experiment. When you're in the middle of your compositional process, uh, are you and you mentioned this earlier. Let me go back to my notes as you were talking. You mentioned with your grandmother emoting through music, and I thought that was a really interesting way to put it. Um, do you follow more of an intellectual approach, or do you follow more of an emotional, like what am I trying to get at sort of thing? The how do you approach your creative direction? Is it kind of a discovery process, or is it more of a linear, I have these things that I want to do along the way, type of thing?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I approach music from the standpoint of getting some sort of I mean, it depends. I mean, it's not the same for every single piece, because an opera is different than a string quartet, for example. But my approach is I, I write from the heart, and I write with emotion in mind. Um, if there are times where I feel like I need to turn on the little intellectual thing to please a critic or something like that, which I rarely do, I can do that. But there are I keep referencing Loving. There are parts in Loving. Sorry, I don't know how loud that siren is, but there are parts of Loving that are completely atonal, um, that are devoid of any emotion. And because that fit that specific scene. I approach it always from the standpoint that I want my listener to come away with some sort of emotional response, whether it's joy, whether it's questioning things, um, some sort of emotional response. And that is the same as if I'm writing an opera or I'm writing a string quartet. Even if you walk away from the string quartet and say, hey, that was dope, great. That's what I want you to get out of it. You know, I wrote a piece called An African American Requiem, and I don't try to prescribe emotions that I want people. You know, one question that I oftentimes get is, what do you want the audience to get out of it? Well, I don't want to say what I want the audience to get out of it, because I want them to get out of it whatever they're going to get out of it. And in some respects, it's not my responsibility to tell people how to feel when something is done. I'm writing from my perspective, and then you all go out and have the conversation about how it makes you feel. That's what I want the audience to get out of it. But I'm always writing from some sort of emotional response. And I think by virtue of me being a singer, which is so vulnerable and in the heart, I think that definitely bleeds into my own composition.
So you also mentioned earlier, early in your talk there, kind of being, um, I don't know how to say it, maybe surprised at how you ended up where you ended up. You know, I mean, anybody who follows anyone's life story is like, wow, that was a twist and a turn that I didn't expect.
Mhm.
What I'm wondering though is as a composer, as a Black composer, um, getting into this is what I talk to the students all the time, is that, you know, half of what we do as musicians is learning the craft, you know, as a performer, as a composer, as a songwriter, whatever. The other half is networking. And I wanted to ask you about the networking aspect of your career path. Um, what sort of strategies would you recommend to a young musician who's trying to uh, develop an audience, develop an identity, a musical identity, an artistic identity? What would you recommend to a young person who's, I guess, for lack of a better word, trying to break into the business?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's especially in the beginning, it's really important to do as much as you can, even if the pay is awful. That is because you never know what that will lead to in the future. And I am a prime example of that. I have done programs. Um, I've been a part of festivals that didn't really pay that much, but I got to tell you, those connections are your payment. And I know you can't eat off of connections, but and you can't eat off of what is it? Not experience, but exposure. You can't eat off of exposure. But I'm telling you, those early connections that you make are really, really, really crucial. There are people that I work with today who I have known probably my entire musical life, and I never knew that because you know they've sort of come up as well, and I never knew that we would work together in this fashion. Um, Even people that I went to high school with, I have to say. The other thing that I will say is that within those connections, be a nice person, because that is the most important. Your reputation is the most important thing. And I don't care. You can be talented. You can write like John Adams. You can do all of these things. But if you are a jerk, nobody's going to want to work with you. And especially, I feel like the tide is definitely changing toward working with people who are talented and nice. So the days of the sort of dictatorial conductor and like yelling at people, you hear these videos of Toscanini, contrabassi, contrabassi, like going crazy. Those days are over. Those days are done. Be nice. That is my number one advice, because people will always want to work with you. That's what I have to say about that.
Right on. I tell my students the same thing. I had a trombone teacher when I was a teenager. I'm a trombone major, so you talk about trumpet, yay, brass. But yeah, I tell my students the same thing. Is they're he pulled me aside. I think I was 16 years old, and he said, be nice, be somebody who shows up on time, knows that, has their stuff learned, all that sort of thing. So thank you for saying that, because I've been saying it for years, and I appreciate the fact that it's coming from somebody with a exemplary resume such as yourself. So
And also turn things in on time. Like use the time now to practice, like turn in papers on time. Use that time to practice. Because if you have a deadline and you don't turn things in on time, you can actually be docked in your pay. Like there are all these things that can happen. But again, do the things that you're supposed to do and you will be fine.
right on, right on. So you mentioned the Blacknificent Seven, and the collective of composers. Um, I know we're almost out of time here. Uh, I wonder if you could speak a little bit on the idea of breaking down the barriers, uh, for people who've been dismissed from certain artistic expressions, for instance, symphonic music, Black composers. I mean, I was had 2 college degrees before, and had taught for almost 10 years, actually over 10 years, before I'd even heard of Chevalier de Saint George. And as a conductor myself of orchestras, I was like, holy crap, why do I not know of this guy? And so when I've had the opportunity with various student ensembles, we've actually tried to perform some of these pieces, just to kind of illuminate that marginalized history. But as a look moving forward from that, can you speak to breaking down those barriers, and breaking down the status quo of gatekeeping in concert music, art music?
Yeah, I mean, so the Blacknificent Seven, B7, like I said, we're sort of a glorified text group. We bounce all ideas off of each other. We go there if we have questions relating to sort of relationships within the industry. Um, if we can't fulfill on commission, we were the first, we suggest another person from the group. But anyway, so we all are working composers. This is what we do. So we are definitely coming from a place of privilege. And I think that we feel the sense of responsibility to help break down some of those barriers. And for me, honestly, it's as simple as like showing up to the concert hall with a baseball cap and I wear it backwards. To me, that's helping break down a barrier. I did a Beethoven 9 in California and I wore a fire engine red suit. I didn't wear a tuxedo because I think there are these things that come along with it, with the sort of elitism and the sort of poshness of classical music that need to be broken down. And it's little things like that that I can do. I didn't see a lot of Black folks in the symphony orchestra, but if a child saw me on stage, sort of just kind of chill and relaxed, I think that's an invitation that says everybody is welcome, because it's the truth. It is music. It's not, I hate this term almost, classical music. It is music. And everybody is invited to listen to music at the end of the day. And so I feel a great responsibility to make sure that folks who are Black and brown, especially young children, and actually when I did Sanctuary Road, oh my gosh, there were so many teenagers who came up to me and they were like, we never been to an opera before, but we kind of like it. It was great. I was in Virginia for 6 whole weeks. And the amount of teenagers who I talked to, who saw themselves represented on the stage, who heard themselves represented on the stage, not only vocally, but also through the stories, it absolutely makes a difference. So we have to create the people who are going to be either the benefactors or the performers of the future. It's imperative that we do that.
Right on. Thank you. That is a great testimonial. Is there a, besides just calling it music, is there a term that you would like your music to be described as a, I don't know, we talk about like concert music, classical music, art music. If you were to give a term to the music that you write, is there a preferred term that you have that you would like to call it?
I think lately I've been saying concert music. And then you have to explain what that is, which is fine. Ultimately I end up saying classical music because people can relate to that a little bit better. But I've been leading with concert music because that feels right to me.
Right on. Well, we're at 1:30 East Coast time. I'm not sure if our Zoom meeting is going to go much longer. I've been checking my phone, but I don't think we have any more questions from the live chat, just what I've gotten um, from my students and from your talk earlier. Let's see, is there anything that you think you might want to add as we get ready to close out?
That this has just been a real privilege. I was very honored to have been asked to do this. I love to talk about this topic, and I could talk about it all day. I've been doing a lot of panels on what it means to be a Black musician in this industry, and though that gets a little tiring sometimes, so this format to me feels good for me to be able to still say the things that I need to say, but in a way that doesn't feel like I'm being oppressed.
I understand. Well, I suppose we don't have any questions, any further questions from the live chat on YouTube. I'm guessing that we're going to go ahead and close out this session. Ladies and gentlemen, Damien Jeter, composer extraordinaire. Oh, actually, one last question. If some of our audience members would like to follow you and access recordings of your music, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You could go to my website, which is Damien Jeter, that's Geter, music.com, or just follow me on Instagram. It's Jeter, Geter.
Awesome. That would be excellent. And you're on Instagram. Do you have any other like site besides your website that you host information on? Is that just
Facebook? But I don't know if do people still use Facebook? I don't know.
Parts like me, yeah, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So I would love to thank everybody who joined us today. Thank you so much, Damien Jeter, for coming on to our talk today. Thank you to Sunny Peoples for arranging this, and the Matthew Blanchard for the tech support. Thank you to Dr. Marcia Constant for the opening remarks, and Carolyn Phillips, Dean Carolyn Phillips, for the introduction on the statement of occasion. Other than that, thank you, sir, so much for all of your insight and historical context for all of this. We really appreciate you, and hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
Thank you. Come to the opera next year. Come see Loving versus Virginia.
Right on. We'll make sure that we get that information out. So.